good? Okay. Thanks, Dylan. All right. What, you want to pray for us to open us up?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Lord, we thank you so much for tonight, another opportunity to more dive into your word and just see the harmony that is there, Lord, that the consistency of your word, of these different authors and these different contexts telling the same story. Lord, I just pray that you'd help our hearts and our minds to be in the right place tonight to receive it, and Lord, to just use the truth here to apply to our lives daily. And I just pray that you help us to focus on or the message of the gospel as we draw near to Passion Week and Lord, ultimately the crucifixion. Help us to truly understand the weight of this, Lord, and to give you the glory and the thanks for what you've done for us. And we just ask your blessing over this night. And thank you for James for teaching it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks for it. Yeah, for people watching online, we had some technical difficulties, so no projector today, which is a shame because I had some cool diagrams to show, but that's okay. How was Palm Sunday?
Good.
Palm Sunday this past Sunday?
I loved Pastor Sam's Palm Sunday show.
Sure, yes.
I was supposed
Oh,
to see
yeah.
that. They stole it from me.
I haven't seen it yet. So we were away.
Carly just said, we were in church, she says, he's wearing this shirt, and sure enough, he said it right after. That was so funny.
Nice.
I didn't catch it actually.
So yeah, we're right in the middle of Passion Week. Schedule-wise, we're not in Passion Week yet in our booklets, but we're going to intercept that today. But we're on Monday, where Jesus cleansed the temple. Would have been 1,992 years ago today. So we'll intercept that hopefully in this class. Okay, where did we leave off? Zacchaeus. Yeah, right before Zacchaeus. We're kind of at a pivotal moment here in Jesus' ministry, right? You think about this this diagram that we've been looking at this whole time, right? And we are right at the end of that purple section there, right? So you've got his public ministry, you've got his private ministry for 6 months, then you've got his kind of circling Jerusalem ministry, and we're in the last day of his whole ministry before Passion Week, okay? We're about to enter Passion Week. And throughout the whole 2 years, what's kind of the stage that's been set? What are the thoughts of the disciples right now? What are the thoughts of the people about Jesus? Things going well, not so well.
Some people think he's coming to claim his Messiah title.
Yeah. Yeah, people think he's on his way to Jerusalem to finally be king in the way that, remember the very first class, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way that they were expecting him to be king. And he's told them so many times, I'm going to go die, right? And the kingdom is going to come, not in the way that you expect. But for some reason, they still think that he's just going to come and be the king, right?
And the Pharisees are planning to kill him.
Yeah.
Multiple times.
Yeah, so the stage that's been set for Passion Week, right, is the Pharisees really want to kill him, right? What about the people in Jerusalem?
They really don't like it.
Some do, some don't.
Yeah, there's division, right? Some do, some don't. And he's been stirring the pot, as we've been saying over and over and over again. And now, as we enter Passion Week, which is the whole point of the last 6 months, is to stir the pot, you're going to see all this division really play out, right? What about his disciples? How are his disciples doing?
They think the same, actually.
Pardon?
They thought the same. They was going to take over and
Mhm.
they were going to take over Rome and rule.
Yeah.
They were going to be with him.
They don't understand, even though Jesus has been very clear to them. What do they have their minds focused on? Earth, worldly things, who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. I think they've forgotten where a lot of them came from, right? They were poor fishermen, tax collectors, and now they've been around Jesus for 3 years, and they're starting to think, highly of themselves. I should be sitting at Jesus' right and left, arguing about who's the greatest. They're focused on worldly things. They're focused on how they can benefit themselves, how Jesus can benefit them. And time's up, basically, right? So it'd be cool to see this final week of teaching Jesus. I feel like Jesus shifts a little bit to teaching them, like, not that he expects them to get this right now, but he's teaching them things that once he dies and then the helper comes, the Spirit, then they remember, right? So the teaching is still profitable, but Jesus kind of knows that this is the state, this is what's going to happen. So that's the stage that's been set for Passion Week. Any questions about any of that? Okay, because we're really, changing gears here to a new section of Jesus' ministry. And as we've said over and over again, it's amazing how the Gospels really hone in on this final week of Jesus. I mean, look at your booklets, right? You want to see kind of how far along we are? We're in his final week, and we still have, a third of the Gospels to get through, right? Or maybe closer to a quarter. So, a lot of teaching in this final Passion Week, right? Has anyone been doing the reading?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, awesome. Is it helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Cool. Very good. All right. So we're in the final day or two before Passion Week. Jesus just had that interaction, I think is where we left off last time, right? He had that interaction with James and John, who wanted to sit at his right and left hand. And so once again, we see that this doesn't matter how many times Jesus tells them, they're not getting it yet because they don't have the Spirit, right? And so, geographically, where is Jesus right now? Not yet. Well, he was in Bethany, right, to raise Lazarus in February, right? And we have this map on, where is it?
155.
155 in your booklets. So we got that map there where he was in Bethany, right, around February time. He healed Lazarus. And then he's got, a couple weeks left, those final months, where he needs to time it perfectly with Passover. And so he's going to kind of tarry in Samaria, where it's kind of safe. Ephraim, he's going to go up to the Herod Valley, where he's going to heal those 10 lepers, and then join up with all the pilgrims going down the Jordan Rift, right? And that's where he's been doing this final teaching as he makes his final approach up for Passover. And so right now he's kind of crossing over the Jordan, and he's entering into Jericho. See Jericho there in the green? And so Jericho was kind of the final pit stop that you would make before hiking up the rift called the Way of Adumim up into Jerusalem. And you wouldn't be caught dead at night or alone on the Way of Adumim because it was very dangerous, right? Parable of the Good Samaritan was there. So you had your final kind of pit stop in Jericho, and then it was about a 6-hour climb up out of those mountains into Jerusalem. Okay? So he's just entering Jericho right now. All right. So I think we're on page 165. With the story of blind Bartimaeus. Now it's interesting, Matthew's account versus, Matthew and Mark's account versus Luke's account. This is one of those many, kind of sad examples of where people look at the Gospels and go, see, there's errors in the Gospels, Matthew and Mark says that, Matthew says he's leaving Jericho, but then Mark and Luke says he's entering Jericho. So which is it? Right? The Bible is corrupts. Again, as we've talked about many times in this class, we don't need to give an answer for why this happens, because it's not as if these gospel writers, made an error because they didn't know what the other person was saying. They were being intentional about the way that they wrote. Most likely, what was happening here is at this time there was an old Jewish Jericho. This is the Jericho where Joshua, and his army marched around in Joshua. Same city that King Eglon ruled in after during the Judges, and Ehud came and conquered him. So that would have been kind of in ruins, but that would have been the Jewish Jericho. And then a little bit away from that was the more modern Jericho at Jesus' time, which was more pagan. It was Roman. King Herod had a palace there, right at the spring of the Wadi Kilt. So they would have been separated a little bit. So when you go to Jericho today, you can almost see this separation a little bit as well, although the city's kind of engulfed all of it. But during Jesus' time, there would have been a very Jewish Jericho, and then a more Gentile, more popular pagan Jericho. Okay? And so, of course, Matthew, I think, Matthew being more Jewish, he's going to refer to Jericho, Jewish Jericho or Hebrew Jericho. And I think what's happening here is Jesus is leaving that Jericho and entering the modern, more widely accepted Jericho. And it was somewhere in between these cities that this happened. Does that make sense? So anyways, that's just a theory as to why one is saying he's leaving Jericho, but the other's saying that he entered Jericho. But anyways, and then you also have the difference of Matthew's account, there were 2 blind men, but then Mark's account and Luke's account, there's only 1, right? Similar to, remember with Legion, right? The man with Legion. In one account there's 2, and then in the other accounts there's 1. I think that this is probably because this person who was healed became pretty famous in the Christian community afterwards. And so in Mark's account, it literally names him Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, as if people should know who this is. Similar to what we talked about with the man with Legion, right? One of these people were impacted and went and were widely known in the Christian community. And so technically Mark and Luke aren't wrong. Yes, a blind man was healed. Matthew says there were more than 1. There were actually 2, but there's no issue here. Make sense? All right. Someone want to read Mark's account of this story?
And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. He cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." And throwing off his cloak, he spread out and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Rabbi, let me recover my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way.
Thank you. What do you guys notice from there? What stands out?
He recognizes him as the son of David.
Mm-hmm.
He follows him.
Follows him? What were you going to say, babe?
Well, that's the only one that I've read where he's actually a son of a certain person. So he had to be a well-known person.
Yeah, totally. Yep. Yeah, and Bar meant son of, right? So Bartimaeus. Yep.
Similar to other accounts, he said, "Your faith has made you well." Too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the Greek there, as we saw last week, that word is sozo, which is saved. Basically, your faith has saved you. Right? You notice how he asked the exact same question that James and John asked in the passage right before? Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you?
Mm-hmm.
Very similar, right? But I think very different heart motivation behind these two, right?
I would say this one's more sincere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we see what we've seen so many times, the persistence of this man, right? Think of how many times the gospel writers are very sure to show these people who come to Jesus, like the Syrophoenician woman, or so many where they're just desperate to come to Jesus, and that's the person that Jesus heals and saves and says, "Your faith has made you well," because they're desperate to come to him, right? And they're usually poor people, or disabled, or Gentiles, or Samaritans, and so we see another example of this. I love when it says he throws off his cloak and springs up and comes to Jesus. and we lose a little bit in the culture here, but what you need to know is that in this day and age, a poor blind beggar, their coat was everything. That was the one item that they probably couldn't survive without, and probably the only item that they really had. The cloak would, or a coat, would keep them cool when the sun's beating down on them, right? Kind of like an umbrella, or during the rain, it would cover them. They would sleep on it. Think of Paul in 2 Timothy when he's about to die and he's in the prison cell. What does he ask Timothy to bring him? His coat, right? He's just the coat and the parchments, right? Bring me the scriptures and my coat. You know, poor Paul in the prison cell. He's about to die. He's in a cold prison cell and he has nothing. And he asks for scriptures and his coat. Timothy, bring me my coat. I left it. You know. Think of Matthew 5, right? When Jesus talks about if someone steals from you, if he takes your coat, you know. A coat was very important in this day and age, especially to someone in this state. And he just is so desperate. He doesn't even take the time to pack it up and bring it with him to Jesus. He just throws it off and springs up and comes to
I
Christ.
find that amazing that he sprung up
Yeah.
straight. So he must have the sense of the voice to be able to know where he had to go.
Yeah, again, when we read through the Gospels, there's only so much real estate on the scrolls, right, when this is being written down. And so those details just add so much more when you really go, why did the writer put that there, right? So I think that's pretty cool. Any other thoughts?
He's asking for mercy. That's what he says. He doesn't shout, "Give me my sight." He starts with asking for mercy. It's the right response.
Yeah, that's a cool observation. It's true. Yeah.
Mark wrote Jesus to where Matthew wrote the Lord.
Yeah. In which verse?
Where we were.
Yeah, and the man says Rabbi, teacher, but then Luke's account said Lord.
Yeah,
Master.
it said when he heard that was Jesus of Nazareth, he said, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And up there in Matthew it says, Lord, have mercy on us, son of David.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's a really, we've seen this story so many times, right? I think we see it so many times because it's so important to see that this is how you come to the kingdom, right? All the Pharisees and all their pomp and all their, resume of here's all the things that I've done and all their riches and glory and everything, and this blind Bartimaeus, he's going to be at the Lord's table, right?
I was there.
Yeah.
Technically, because when I realized that where I was going, I knew if I could just be next to him and he'd take it all away. So it's the same scenario, really.
Yeah.
How many of us get to that point?
It's the only thing that matters. As we said last class, it's the great equalizer, right? The only thing that will matter is did you come to Christ on your knees and say, Lord, save me, right? And we saw last week, Jesus talked about being rich or poor, and it's hard for a rich person to come to the kingdom because you need to enter as poor and needy and on your knees and like a child. But that doesn't mean rich people can't enter the kingdom, right? Which is exactly what we see here with Zacchaeus, right? Flip over to the next page. Famous story of Zacchaeus, the wee little man. All right.
We gotta sing the song.
Do you want to sing the song first?
No,
Alex?
I was asking if you were
Oh, song.
All right.
You know I don't. I don't know that song.
It's a kid song.
Sing it for us, Tyler.
No.
I think probably look it up.
She's doing it. Look at her.
No.
Okay.
All right. I think we were talking about last class. Carly, you were mentioning that you didn't know that this story was here in this section.
At the end.
Yeah.
I had this totally misplaced. I thought it was at the beginning,
Mhm.
But,
He's blowing our minds.
Yeah, the day before Passion Week, which is interesting. We talked about, Carly and I were talking about this last week, where it says that, we'll just read it, but all grumbled at this man because he was attacked. He was a sinner, and I wonder if all the disciples, especially Matthew, who was also a tax collector, if he grumbled as well. But it says, Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. What an interesting story. Again, it says all grumbled. I wonder if that was the disciples as well, right? Who kind of forgot where they came from. Did they deserve to be disciples of Jesus? No. It's not like Jesus went around and picked a certain type of, rich people or people with all kinds of qualifications, right? As 1 Corinthians 1 would say, he chose the lowest and despised and weakest to shame the wise, right? But all of a sudden, in the midst of their asking to sit at his left and right in the throne room and arguing amongst themselves who is the greatest, they start to think highly of themselves and forget where Jesus called them from. And I don't know for sure, because it doesn't explicitly say it here, but it does say all grumbled. Do we ever do that?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. In what ways?
Hmm?
In what ways?
Thinking you deserve something. I mean, just in your mind that it belongs to me
Mm-hmm.
rather than others.
Or we try to take control instead of giving it to God. Or we may give it to him and take it back.
Yeah.
Give it again.
Being
just-
ungrateful.
What's that word?
Being ungrateful.
Oh,
Yeah, I would say even if we don't directly think highly of ourselves, like they're showing, if they are grumbling, then they're showing via what they're doing, that like they think more highly of themselves than this person. And how often do we think, it's like, how could this person be like allowed to be in this situation or be doing this?
Yeah.
It's like what's going through your head that allows you to think that?
Yeah, especially in church and leadership in church especially, right? To look at, little ones, as Jesus has talked about, children in the faith, and to go, I don't have time for you, right? Like, do you not remember where you came from? And you think you did anything to deserve being there, right? We've seen that so many times, and to forget, where you came from. I think too that's kind of what Jesus is getting at, when he said before, being faithful in little, you'll be faithful in much. Any other thoughts about this story we have of Zacchaeus?
I think it's just interesting what Zacchaeus says. He says, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I defraud anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. It almost seems similar to him boasting about things he's done or things he's going to do. But it seems like this is from a different heart based on how Jesus answers him.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it's more of a response of, I've got some lifestyle changes I need to make, instead of like, I'm going to do all this to earn my way. to put
Yeah.
Contrite.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, he's not doing this to earn favor from Jesus or to earn salvation or anything. It's just a free will offering, right? He's been impacted by Christ and the gospel, and this is his response, right?
It's an outpouring of a repentant heart.
Yeah.
Do you think that God did this on purpose so everybody can see that those who are lost, that he can change them?
Yeah, I mean that's every interaction Jesus has had with someone like this, whether they're rich or whether they're poor, whether they're a sinner, whether they're righteous, all of it doesn't matter. It's how you respond, right? Like we've been saying, it's the great equalizer. Usually we see examples of the lowest coming to Christ and responding this way out of desperation, but here we see another example of someone coming to Christ and just yeah, as Jed said, the outpouring of their heart. They just didn't ask him to do this, right? He's just wanting to do this, to repent, and this is his response. Very different to the rich young ruler last week that came up to Jesus, right? And was not willing to give this kind of thing up.
But he was blessed to have him in his house,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Or the Pharisees who give to the poor, but all they're doing is they're uplifting themselves. Look how righteous and kind we are.
Yep. All right. So we are, just timeline-wise, this would be Thursday, I believe. So the next day, he's going to stay at Zacchaeus' house, and then the next day in the morning is when he and all the other pilgrims are going to make their way up that 6-mile trek up to Jerusalem. But Jesus has one more teaching here this evening. Teaching on the kingdom. It says there in verse 11, as they heard these things, he proceeded to tell a parable because he was near to Jerusalem, right? Literally going to Jerusalem the next day. And because they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. See that there? And so Jesus is going to tell a very interesting parable that I think still applies to us today. I think this is a good point too. We've kind of danced around it, and this is not a theology class, but I think this would be a good point to talk about eschatology and the 3 different views that most people today hold. Does anyone know what eschatology is? Study of the end times. And so I don't know of any better place so we're just going to do a really quick theology on eschatology. Here are the 3 main views, here's what they are, because Jesus is going to talk about eschatology a lot during Passion Week. And so we're just going to set the foundation now, okay? So I'll try to be really brief, because again, this is not a theology class, but we'll just talk about it. Is eschatology important, first of all?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, why?
We're living it.
We're living it? Yeah.
About a fourth of the Bible is prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it points to a lot of actions though too, how you're
Yeah.
gonna take on what your beliefs are.
Absolutely.
I think it's 1 Thessalonians 5 that tells you to keep aware. I think it talks about you remain sober, be on alert for the time.
Yep. Yeah, thinking about end times is supposed to drive us to urgency, right? Who here has been part of churches before where they just kind of really don't want to talk about eschatology and just don't want to think about it?
Yep.
You hear the word, lots of times, I'm pan now. It'll all pan out in the end. I don't want to think about it, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to be part of the whole debate, so we'll just turn a blind eye to it and we'll just not talk about it. The problem with that is that, as Lori said, 1/4. I don't know if that's accurate. I would imagine that's probably accurate. Almost every prophet of the Old Testament talks about eschatology. Jesus constantly talked about eschatology. His final nights with his disciples, he really, really, really talked about eschatology. Almost every epistle talks about eschatology. The last book in the Bible is all eschatology. Last time I checked, 2 Timothy 3:16 says all scripture is profitable, right? For teaching and reproof and correction, which includes all those passages on eschatology.
Well, there's
Right.
more about his second coming than there is his first coming.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. So it's important to not turn a blind eye to it, is the point, right? So, anyways, the three main views. Anyone name them?
Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib.
Those are so.
What you talking
Those
about?
are the three views under what we would call premillennialism.
Okay.
But the main three views. Oh, just making sure the camera's still on. So the three main overarching views.
Pre-mill,
Yeah, there's pre-mill.
amill.
Yeah. So there's pre-mill.
That's what I said.
You said pre-trib, right?
Yeah,
Pre-trib,
but
post-trib.
oh yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
meant. Yeah.
Yeah, not to be confused with pre, mid,
Yeah.
and post-trib. Okay. So there's pre-mill. There's amill. And post-mill. Why are they named like that? What does the pre, and post mean?
Referencing
Before,
millennial reign.
time,
Yeah.
and
1,000 years.
Yeah, they refer to when Jesus is going to come in relation to the 1,000 years. Okay? So Revelation 20 talks about how Jesus is going to reign on the earth for for 1,000 years, right? And so the pre, and post are referred to in relation to that 1,000 years. When is Jesus going to come? Okay? So pre-mill means he's going to come for his second coming, and then that will start his 1,000-year reign. Okay? Amill is kind of, well, means kind of anti, like atheist would be theos, like no God,
Right.
same thing, right? It's like, it's kind of allegorical, there really isn't, there is maybe a millennium, but it's not 1,000 years, and it could be represented by Jesus reigning up in heaven right now, and the next thing to happen is, Jesus is gonna come and we're all gonna go to heaven.
So is that where the idea of like, oh, the millennium's like in us right now?
Kind of, yeah.
That's stupid.
And then there's post-mill, which is basically Jesus' second coming. He's gonna come back after the millennium, and we're living in the millennium right now. The difference between amill and post-mill is post-mill, they really believe we're in the millennium right now, and things are gonna get better and better until Jesus returns. Okay? These two views here usually will argue that the tribulation has already happened. Okay? That happened during 70 AD, during the persecution of Rome. Nero was the Antichrist, all those kinds of things. Okay? We at Zion Bible and here at the Desert Ridge, we strongly believe pre-mill. We believe that probably very soon, the rapture will happen. The tribulation, 7-year tribulation period will occur with the Antichrist. And then Jesus will come at the end of that to defeat the armies going to battle against Jerusalem. And then after that, immediately after that, then Jesus Christ will reign physically on earth for 1,000 years.
I just don't see how they can believe that stuff because the 2 and 3, because we're not in peace right now. There's wars. In the millennium, there is none of that.
Yep.
So I don't know how you can get that.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to, I agree with you. The reason that we hold to pre-mill is because we're just reading our Bibles literally. When Jesus said these things are going to happen, I believe they're going to happen exactly as he said, right? Yeah. Now, the reason that there's a debate is because for the last 2,000 years, since 70 AD, up until 70 years ago in 1948, what has there not been? Israel, right? So I kind of understand, and I have a little bit of grace for 2,000 years of church history. They're looking at all these prophecies from Jesus going, all these prophecies are about Israel. This is what's going to happen in Jerusalem and the temple and animal sacrifice. That hasn't been since 70 AD. For almost 2,000 years, we haven't had any of that. So maybe we need to start thinking, maybe Jesus didn't mean this, and maybe this actually means this, and it's symbolic, and it doesn't really, because no nation rises from the dead. Have you ever met a Babylonian, or a Hittite, or a Philistine? Nations don't come back from the dead, except for Israel, 70 years ago.
But then you've got two things. You've got tribulation, there's sacrifice, then millennium, there's sacrifice, but both are getting sacrifices, so I don't know how they mix them up.
Yeah. Well, that's deep down into the weeds of eschatology. But that's why there's been a debate for so long. And what you're seeing in churches where there's all kinds of debates is kind of residue from that. Personally, I believe there's no excuse anymore. I mean, Israel has come back from the dead. They are doing exactly what Isaiah and Jeremiah all prophesy they're going to do, which is come back from all the countries they've been scattered among, coming back to their land. They're right around the corner from building the third temple, restarting animal sacrifice. The Hebrew language was resurrected, like 150 years ago. So it's pretty incredible. And it's really incredible to add some pictures of Tel Aviv, for example, to drive through those cities and to remember that this didn't exist 70 years ago. Like, what other nation does that? How many times has people have tried to exterminate Israel? And it just keeps coming, right?
So just to kind of get a better picture of the differences between the second and the third one, I don't know if you can give that. I feel like you said the similarities between the two.
Pre-mill is we're going to experience birth pangs, as we are right now, right? The rapture will happen. There will be a 7-year tribulation period where the Antichrist will reign, and then at the end of that 7 years, Jesus Christ will come, and he will kill the Antichrist, and then he will reign on earth in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. Okay? Amil is there really isn't a millennium, it's metaphorical. The church will kind of rule on the earth, I guess. It's more undefined, I guess. Yeah, like we're in the kingdom now, but in more of an undefined way. And then post-mill is more, we're really in the kingdom now. 70 AD was when the tribulation happened. Nero was the Antichrist. All those prophecies were fulfilled in 70 AD. And we're in the millennium right now, where Christ is reigning from heaven, and the whole world will become churchified. And then once the whole world is converted to Christianity, then Christ will come back. Okay? So that's eschatology, just as fast as I can do it. You'll see as we go through these texts how it'll be helpful. But as I said, the debates and the reason people shy away from eschatology is just because of residue from the last, several centuries of church history, where there kind of was, there was no Israel. So I kind of get it, but now it's like if you're looking out the windows of the car and looking at what's happening, we don't need to allegorize all those passages anymore. We can take them literally to happen exactly as they said. And when I stand before the Lord one day, I want to be able to say, Lord, I just read your word and I just believe it for what it said. I didn't jump around and do allegory with it. It said this, and I believe that would happen. Right? I just wanted to read a quick quote from Mark Twain, so Mark Twain visited Palestine and Israel in 1867, so not that long ago, right? And this is how he described Israel. Is a desolate country whose soil is rich enough but is given over wholly to weeds, a silent, mournful expanse. A desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. We never saw a human being on the entire route through Israel. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere, even the olive and cactus. Basically, it goes on. Mark Twain describes the whole of Israel as like a malarial swampland. There was nothing. right? And now this is Tel Aviv today. Like,
It's pretty.
Israel is coming back to life, exactly as Scripture says. So, anyways, that's eschatology, and you'll see how that foundation, now that we know kind of those three views, we'll talk more about that in these next several weeks that we go through Passion Week. Because Jesus talks about eschatology constantly throughout that. And he kind of starts it with this parable here, which I think is very accurate to the pre-mill eschatological view and what we're living in right now. So it says there in verse 11, as they heard these things, he proceeded to tell this parable because he was near to Jerusalem and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. He said, therefore, a nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and then return. Calling 10 of his servants, he gave them 10 minas and said to them, engage in business until I come. Okay? But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. So far in the parable we have three characters. What are the three characters?
Noblemen, citizens, sort of.
Yeah. What do you think they represent?
Jesus.
Nobleman is Christ,
Yeah.
right? He's got servants,
Followers.
right? People who are actual believers, servants of him, right? And then citizens who hate him. Who might they be?
Non-believers.
Pharisees, Sadducees.
Yeah, probably ethnic Jews, right? Citizens of the country he was to rule over. They hated him, right? It literally says there, we do not want this man to reign over us. That's what the citizens say, right? Reminds me a lot of what they're about to say, right? We have no king but Caesar, right? And this nobleman goes off into a far distant country to receive a kingdom, and then eventually he's going to return. That's where we are right now, right? Christ has gone off to receive a kingdom, and someone will close that door. He's gone off to a far kingdom, he's gone off to receive a kingdom, and he will come back with that kingdom in hand. But in the meantime, he's called his servants to make use of what he's given them and work in the meantime, right? That's where we are right now, okay? So, when he returned, having received the kingdom, he ordered these servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that they might know, or that he might know what they had gained by doing business. The first came before him, saying, Lord, your mina has made 10 minas more. By the way, a mina is about 100 denarii, which is a day's wage. Okay? So, when he says, so 100 days wage, call it maybe, if you take an average salary in our day, $100,000 or something like that, I don't know. It'd be about $25,000. And you turn $25,000 into $250,000, $250,000. Okay? And the nobleman said to him, well done, good servant. Because you have been faithful in a very little, you shall have authority over 10 cities. Now, Matthew's account in Matthew 25 later on, during the Olivet Discourse, a couple days after this, it says, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your master. Right? The words that we all should yearn to hear one day. Right? He says, because you have been faithful in very little, you shall have authority over 10 cities. And a lot of scholars will link that to what Jesus said kind of before this in Luke, right? You will be faithful in little, then you will be faithful in much, right? With the little things that we have here on earth, whether it be financial resources, time, spiritual gifts, using those so that in the kingdom you will be faithful over much because you've proven yourself faithful over little. Then it says, and the second came, saying, Lord, your mina has made 5 minas. And he said to him, you are to be over 5 cities. Then another came to him, saying, Lord, here is your mina, which I kept laid away in a handkerchief. For I was afraid of you, because you are a severe man. You take what you did not deposit, and reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, I will condemn you with your own words, you wicked servant. You knew that I was a severe man, taking what I did not deposit, and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put my money in the bank, and at my coming I might have collected it with interest? And he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him, and give it to the one who has 10 minas. And they said to him, Lord, but he has 10 minas. And he said, I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given, but from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. What do you guys think about that?
That's sad, last guy. His salvation. I take it. He lost it. Or never had it.
Yeah. I don't know if it's his salvation being removed here, but maybe his treasure in heaven.
Well, obviously when he was here, he didn't shine any light on anything or to do anything for Jesus while he was here. He was just dipping his big toe in maybe.
Yeah.
Gonna plant that apple seed.
That's right, he did not plant his apple seed.
Yeah, maybe the type of person that has their kingdom, their ticket to the kingdom, right? They're saved, and then they're just gonna coast on the cruise ship to heaven.
They don't sow any seeds.
Yeah. Reminds me a lot of the way I take the third soil, the parable of the sowers, right? It's choked out by the thorns, the cares and the riches of this world, and it did not bear any fruit. The way I take that parable is, it doesn't mean that it was choked out completely, but it just wasn't fruitful. It didn't produce, right? Like the other two with the minas, right? Part of the reason I say I don't think that this person lost their salvation is because you see a little bit of, in that final verse here, you see a distinction between him and the enemies of God, right? But as for these enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slaughter them before me, right? But yeah, this one man who just didn't do anything with what the gifts that the Lord entrusted him in this life, right, till he returned. Reminds me a lot of what it says in 1 Corinthians 3, the believer's judgment. Is everyone aware that even us believers are going to be judged?
Yeah, we are.
Sometimes people see this and they're like, I thought, I was saved. I didn't know I was going to get judged. This is what we would call the Bema Seat judgment. It's not a judgment of salvation, but it's a judgment of what did you do with what the Lord entrusted you with.
Are you going to have a crown or not?
Yeah. So it says here, 1 Corinthians 3, verse 11. No, it's not up there, but I'll just read it. It says, for no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. So not your own foundation. You're not going to build your own tower. Only what is done for Christ. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire. Kind of the motivation of why you did it will be revealed by fire. And the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. So all the things you did in your life with what God entrusted you with, your time, your finances, your skills, if you built it on the foundation of Christ and for his kingdom, it's going to survive. But if you just buried it in the sand and just lived life for yourself, or built it for your own kingdom, which sometimes we're not going to be able to tell the difference until this day, right? You did it so that you could get seen. You did it so that you could be promoted. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive reward. But if anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. And so at this judgment, this believer's judgment, it's not a judgment of salvation, whether you're saved or not, but it will be a judgment of what did you do for the Lord?
And you're hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, the fire will reveal the motivation behind it. And I wonder how many, before this judgment, it's going to be this whole stack of gold, that someone maybe has laid up and it's going to burn away. And that person will be saved, but all the treasure is going to be revealed. That was just done for yourself. Or just buried in the sand,
Well, isn't it kind of similar when he was talking about the Pharisees standing out and being seen that they were this and that, do things in the closet
Mm-hmm.
for God?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's tough in our culture today, right? In the American culture, the push for work so that you can retire and then just live comfortably till you die, right? Let's, remodel our house. Let's go on vacations all the time. It's like, that's not why we remain on earth, right? We're not on earth to live for heaven on earth, right? Heaven will come. We remain on earth after being saved so that we can be on mission for him, right? So, that's what Jesus is telling his disciples here. We have these three characters here that I think really everyone on earth will fall under one of these, right? You're either going to be, we've got Christ, and then the other characters, right, are either you're going to be a servant of the Lord, right, and you're going to work for him, or you're going to be a servant of the Lord and you're not going to do work for him, or you're going to be an enemy of Christ, right? So, again, with the eschatology in view that we talked about before, and the original reason that it says, we've been doing this for the last couple classes, why did Jesus tell this parable? It says he proceeded to tell a parable because he was near to Jerusalem and they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. So what is the overall point based off of that Jesus is making here to his disciples?
It's not gonna be immediate.
Yeah. You guys think the treasure is a couple days away. Try maybe closer to 2,000 years away. And in the meantime, you're supposed to work. Right? Does that make sense? Alright.
All of us, it's just amazing how all of us fall short.
Yeah.
I mean, even Peter and looking at his disciples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I say things like, give examples of being in retirement and remodeling your house or going on vacation, I mean, going on vacation is great, right? But it's when you bury those gifts in the sand and spend everything on yourself, that's when it becomes a problem, right? It's always just asking, Lord, in my life, what have you gifted me with that I can use for you? It's having that motivation. That's the difference, right? What have you entrusted me with? What skills and gifts have you given me that I can help the church with? And that's what he's trying desperately to teach his disciples here. And they don't understand it yet, right? Because they don't have the helper. Okay? So that is Thursday. Okay? Thursday, and then Friday, the next day, see verse 28 there? So I would put Thursday is when he's telling those parables, when he has dinner with Zacchaeus and stays at his house overnight. And then Friday is that verse 28 there, where it says, and when, or after he had said these things, he went on ahead going up to Jerusalem. Now, what happens at the end of Friday for the Jews in their calendar?
So,
That's the Sabbath, right? Friday evening, Sabbath, at sundown, around 5 p.m. So that's how we kind of know which day this would have been, because he wouldn't have had dinner with Zacchaeus and then done this ascent up to Jerusalem, up to Bethany at night. He would have stayed overnight, but then he would have made sure to get there along with the rest of the pilgrims, either get to Bethany or get to Jerusalem before Sabbath, because you couldn't be traveling during the Sabbath, right? So, early Friday morning, exactly 1 week before his crucifixion, he, with the rest of the pilgrims, they're going to make their way up the ascent of Adumim, up towards Jerusalem. Okay? Page 168. We're finally in Passion Week. By the way, the way of Adumim, this ascent that they would do, up from Jericho, up into Jerusalem. Who's heard of the Psalms of Ascent? Sometimes you see in the Psalms it says this is a song or psalm of ascent. This is Psalm 120 to 134. Those psalms, they would recite these as they would ascend during Passover and during the feast up into Jerusalem. And so that's why when you read these psalms, they're very focused on Zion. Lord, protect us from our enemies. Look towards Jerusalem, protect us. It's very focused on Jerusalem and Zion. And so that's what they would have recited as they made their way up this 6-hour hike up into Jerusalem. Okay? Now, just a note on, so we are a week before Passover, and Jesus, of course, was crucified at Passover. And this really is the perfect timing. Who can think of some reasons why this is so significant that Jesus was crucified during this time?
Because everybody traveled to Jerusalem for Passover, and they had already heard about him.
Yeah.
They were waiting for him to come in as their king.
Yeah, the most public event that you could possibly have, right? Deuteronomy 16 talks about the 3 feasts that every male, 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose in Jerusalem. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Booths. And so we have the Passover being one of those feasts, and the most significant feast. You would get not only people in Israel, but also from kind of all over where Jews were sometimes scattered. Everyone would be coming to the city at this time. It would be extremely public, right? You would also have Herod would be there, Pilate would be there to make sure that they could control everything happening in Jerusalem. So you have the ability for that to be fulfilled, where Jesus said that the Jews would hand them over to the Gentiles, or hand him over to the Gentiles to be killed, right? Any other reasons?
It directly parallels Exodus
In what way?
in the way that they would kill a spotless lamb and throw his blood over the threshold, and they killed Jesus.
Yeah, the atonement. Where all of a sudden it's going to be revealed that this pointed to Christ, right? The Passover lamb who was slain.
They had to keep it for a week, right? In the house. They had to eat all of it.
Certain number
no,
of
it
days.
Came
Yeah.
before it was sacrificed. It was in the house. For a week before it was sacrificed. This is like a week before he comes in.
Yeah, well, they would purify themselves for a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know they kept the lamb for a week.
It
That's
had to be in the
interesting.
house with them.
But yeah, they would come a week before to purify themselves. It would take them that time to purify themselves. Passover was also for, it says in Numbers 9 verse 10, It says, "Speak to the people of Israel, saying, if any one of you or your descendants is unclean through touching a dead body or is on a long journey, he shall still keep the Passover of the Lord. In the second month of the 14th day at twilight they shall keep it. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall leave none of it until the morning. They will not break any of its bones." Right? Which of course is another prophecy fulfilled by Christ. "According to all the statutes for the Passover, they shall keep it. If anyone who is clean and is not on a journey fails to keep the Passover, that person shall be cut off from the people. If a stranger or sojourner among you is with you, he shall keep the Passover as well." Passover was for everyone at that time. It was the most significant feast that they would have. And so the amount of people that would just come into the city, right, and all the division that we've been talking about. I mean, just imagine, this is the climax of all of it, right, during Passover, where everyone's talking about it. People are asking the locals who live in Jerusalem, who maybe don't know as much about Jesus, they're asking them about Jesus, and everyone's got an opinion about Jesus. They've just seen Lazarus raised, and these are all going to be people who will then take what happened with Jesus back to where they're from to kind of prime Paul's ministry when he goes to these different places. You also have just undeniable evidence of the resurrection. I mean, think of the things that happen while Jesus is crucified and then is raised, with all those eyewitness accounts, right? You know, if I was a gospel writer and I was going to just make up a story about Jesus, I probably wouldn't say that, you know, a bunch of people rose from their tombs and the temple curtain was torn and that 500 people saw him, because think of how easy that would be.
And the earthquake.
Yeah, and earthquakes, and the sky went dark for 3 hours.
Yep.
If I was trying to make up a story to make people believe it, I probably wouldn't throw in very easily things that you could falsify, where anyone, because there were so many people there, and anyone could just go, I was there, that never happened. The only reason you would add that in is if there were a ton of eyewitnesses and they all saw it, right? So, point being, in Christ's perfect timing, think of the times where he circled Jerusalem. People have tried to kill him, and he says, "No, it's not my time yet. I will lay down my life on my own accord at the exact time that has been prophesied about since Moses with the Passover, and I will do it at this exact time," right? Everything is perfectly primed for this event to happen. Okay? And then we also have the timing of the triumphal entry in Daniel 9, and the math that works out perfectly that we'll go through. So, it's just amazing how the Lord perfectly orchestrated all of that in the timing. Okay? So it says there in John 11:55, "Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand," so approaching, "and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, 'What do you think? That he will come, or that he will not come to the feast at all?' Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know, so that they might arrest Jesus. Now 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead." Okay? So Jesus arrives in Bethany. And I talked about this before, but it's really important to point this out again. Jesus has spent the last probably weeks, or at least week, traveling with all these people that were going down the Jordan Rift to cross over into Jericho and take the way of Adumim up into Jerusalem. He's been talking with them. They saw him heal Bartimaeus. They saw him do many miracles and all these teachings. And all those pilgrims are going to continue on before Sabbath on Friday night. They're all going to continue on into Jerusalem and tell everyone, Jesus has been with us for the last week, and he healed this guy, and he's about to arrive. He's definitely coming for Passover. And the whole city is going to be stirred up, while Jesus stays, 2 miles off over in Bethany, and spends the Sabbath in Bethany. And so they all know that Sunday morning, when the Sabbath is over, guess who's going to come? So you have his triumphal entry primed. Everyone's waiting for him to come. They all know he's coming. Okay? But he spends the Sabbath in Bethany with his friends that we've seen many times now, Mary, Martha, and John, or Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Okay? Page 169. Is that the right page for you guys?
Yep.
Saturday?
Yep.
Alright. So this is Saturday night. Now, so Jesus stayed 2 nights. He stayed the Friday night in Bethany and the Saturday night in Bethany to then go into Jerusalem Sunday morning. Okay? Now, it's really interesting here because you'll notice Matthew and Mark's account both talk about this story, but we've jumped forward in terms of where these passages are in Matthew and Mark. If you were reading in your actual Bible, Matthew and Mark, these, what you're reading right here would come later, and there's a reason for that, okay? But then John comes in after and tells us very clearly what time this dinner took place. And John very clearly says 6 days before the Passover is when he came to Bethany and had this meal. Okay? So John clarifies when this dinner happened. And there's a reason that Matthew and Mark put this dinner later on, as if it happened the Tuesday, a couple days later. Okay? Now the reason for that we'll get into here. Okay? Look at Mark's account. It says, while he was staying at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper. What's interesting about that?
A leper has a house.
Yeah. How does a leper have a house?
He's healed.
Yeah, he was probably healed, right? Lepers were supposed to stay outside the city. How could this leper have a house? He was probably healed. And probably not yesterday, because he probably wouldn't have a house, right? This is probably someone that Jesus had experience with before. We never hear about it in the Gospels, because there are probably many stories that we just never hear about in the Gospels, right? But he's staying at the house of this man who used to be a leper. Notice too how these people that he's staying with are not obeying what the Pharisees had commanded, right? If anyone knows where Jesus is, turn him in, and they're not doing that. So let's read John's account of this story. It says, so they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, of course she did, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at table. Mary, therefore, took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard. Now this is a type of root from India, very expensive. Probably this was her wedding dowry. This was kind of everything she had, or the most expensive thing that she had. And she spends it on Christ. It says, and she wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? By the way, how much money would that be?
A lot.
300 denarii? That's about 1 year's wages, right? So call it 100 grand for us.
Well, good for you.
Not for me. I don't. Yeah, that's
Well, 25%.
You're doing well.
at least several $1,000s. A significant amount of money for anyone. Okay, This is however much money you make, this is a year's worth of it. So it's a lot of money. Okay? And he said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me." By the way, when I say 100,000 salary, I'm speaking in Canadian. Yeah. Take about 75% of that. So John really clears this up. Okay, John obviously being written later. The reason Matthew and Mark have this on Tuesday, when really John clears this up and says, actually, when they say this happened on Tuesday, it's really a flashback to what happened on Saturday, is because Matthew and Mark are trying to connect that this is the reason that Judas decided to betray Jesus. Okay? Look at these next sections here with Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay? So it's saying, so in Matthew, right? Then, or because of this, the way Jesus rebuked Judas here. Then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I deliver him over to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment he sought an opportunity to betray him. Okay? So what Matthew and Mark are doing is, this happened on Tuesday. Judas going to the chief priests and them basically him betraying Jesus, them giving him 30 pieces of silver. He'll betray him Thursday night, right? But he makes a deal with them on Tuesday night. And Matthew and Mark place the dinner that they really had back on Saturday night as kind of a flashback. This is why Judas decided to betray Jesus, because Jesus rebuked him for his heart here in rebuking Mary. Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
I have a question about in Luke's account, just of Judas betraying him, how it describes Satan entering into him. I just wonder what you thought about that.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting example when it gets to, predestination, Calvinism, so again, those are more theology, so we won't spend too much time debating or arguing that. But it's interesting because is Judas responsible for what he did?
Sure he is.
Mm-hmm.
But aren't there prophecies about Judas doing that?
Well, God
Way
knows
before
him.
Judas was born? So did Judas have a choice in that?
Yep.
Could he have not betrayed Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
But there were prophecies about it.
Yeah, but God knows the beginning to the end. Because he also said, then better from there be born too.
Yeah. It's an interesting example of the dichotomy between God's sovereignty and mankind's responsibility. Right? Romans 9. How can he find fault if he's made me this way? Right? If God made me to sin, how am I responsible for that? Right? But who are you, clay, to answer back to the potter?
God knew he was going to do it,
Mm-hmm.
so he, that had to be what happened.
It was recorded.
He knew ahead of time.
But he picked him.
Yeah. It's a very interesting theological, debate, and Scripture seems to be very clear about it, and I can't wrap my head around it the same way I can't wrap my head around the Trinity, or Jesus being fully God and fully man, but that's about as deep as we can afford to dive into the debate between Calvinism and Arminianism in this class. But it's a very interesting example of it. Stuff to wrestle with.
I'm a little confused.
Yeah.
Are you saying that John, he wrote this 6 days before Passover?
No, not that he physically wrote this 6 days.
But
Is that
that's
what you're
what he's
asking?
referring to?
Yeah, so John gives, and you get a couple of these, we're going to get into this with the fig tree, for example. Did that happen Monday or Tuesday? Some gospel writers are better at putting a really hard anchor point, Like one gospel writer might go, after this, Jesus did this. It's like, well, does after this mean immediately after or 2 days later? But then another gospel writer will have the same story and they will go, on the very next day, this happened, right? And so you really look at those kind of anchor points to really figure out timing when these things happen. And sometimes it's really hard. It's really hard to do timing sometimes. But with John's account here, you have in verse 1, 6 days before the Passover. I mean, that's a pretty clear anchor point. So we know when this dinner happened. Okay?
Okay.
So we know that this happened that Saturday night. And therefore, because of that, we know that Matthew and Mark's account, when they kind of have this in their Gospels as if it happened on Tuesday, it's really a flashback to what happened on Saturday. And John's the one that clears that up. Make sense?
Isn't too like Matthew's gospel not organized to be in exact chronological order?
Yeah, Matthew's a little bit less chronological, but I still, and we'll get into this in a second with the temple cleansing, I still really, if you go too far down that train of just, well, the gospel writers just, something happened at the end of Jesus' ministry, but we're just going to stick it in the beginning of his ministry, that makes it hard to trust that gospel writer, right? And there's no issue here. Matthew and Mark are just connecting. Here's what happened last Saturday, and that's why Judas did this, which he did on Tuesday. And we're going to connect. We're going to tell the story connected, so you know that this is why. Make sense? Okay. All right. So, once again, this dinner happens on Saturday before Jesus even enters into Jerusalem. Judas is already angry with Jesus because Jesus rebuked him for what he said about Mary. Matthew and Mark are saying that's the reason, because Judas was upset that Jesus rebuked him, that's the reason that on Tuesday he decides to go and collect money from the Pharisees and make a deal with them to betray Jesus. And then he acts upon that on Passover meal on Thursday night. Okay? All right. All right, Palm Sunday. Triumphal entry, Sunday, March 29th. Who's up for some math? We have time for some math?
Who brought that phone?
Let's do it. It's fun. We'll do some Daniel 9 math about, some people will propose, and I would probably agree based off math, that this Palm Sunday, when the king enters into, the anointed one enters into the city, it perfectly aligns with Daniel 9, to the day. Okay? Now, disclaimer, before we do this math, I think it's really interesting. It happens to line up. It doesn't explicitly say that this math is accurate in the Bible. Okay? So if it says something in the Bible, I'm going to authoritatively say, yes, that's true. This is just my math that is kind of based off things other people have thought. So we'll do it because it's interesting, but if you totally zone out for this, that's fine.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
It has to be accurate too, because Jesus said he wept because they should have known the day of his visitation.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a point where, they should have been able to calculate that day. It doesn't say that, but I think it's another piece of evidence as to why I would think this. 1 Peter 1:10 says, concerning this salvation, the prophets who prophesied about the grace that was to be yours searched and inquired carefully, inquiring what person or time the Spirit of Christ in them was indicating when he predicted the sufferings of Christ and the subsequent glories. And again, we're going to do the math. I find it exciting because I knew that people had done this math before.
Yeah.
And what I decided to do when I first did this was I didn't have someone walk me through the math. I basically went, okay, based off of these assumptions, let me do the math myself and see if it works out. And when I hit enter on the calculator and saw that it matched up perfectly to the day, it was pretty cool. So we'll try to recreate that now. But again, down to the day is really interesting, but definitely they should have known the time period, right? Okay, so let's do some math, okay? First of all, where do we even get this prophecy from? Daniel 9. Daniel 9, starting in verse 24, says 70 weeks are decreed. Now, a week, in Hebrew, that literally is 70 sevens. Okay? They would have understood this to be what we call prophetic years. Okay? So 70 7-year periods are decreed for what he's about to prophesy. Okay? Concerning your people, the Israelites, your holy city, Jerusalem, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity. Okay? And it says, know therefore and understand that from the going, by the way, what's happening right now in Daniel? This is being written.
Are they still in exile?
Yeah, they're in the middle of exile. They're in Babylon. Okay? The Solomon's temple has been destroyed. There's no more temple. Okay? And so the prophecy comes that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, which in Daniel's time is lying in ruins right now, so from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, so there's going to be a decree to rebuild Jerusalem. From that to the coming of an anointed one, which means Messiah, right? Anointed one. There shall be 7 weeks. Okay? So 7 sevens, right? Yeah. What is this? All right. So there will be 7 sevens. How many is that? 49. Good job, guys. Did anyone not use a calculator for that? Then it says, then for 62 weeks it shall be built again, the city, with squares and a moat, but in a troubled time. By the way, they just found a moat in Jerusalem, like last year. This will be during a troubled time, right? Time where they're conquered by Greeks and Romans, but it's going to continue to be built. During Jesus' time, they were actually still building the temple. So, there will be 62 weeks, okay? 62 times 7 is what?
Something.
Just got a calculator.
433.
What is it?
434? Yeah.
434?
Yeah, I didn't figure it out, I just guessed.
Alright. So in total, how much is that?
483.
483.
That's right, got it.
So 483 prophetic years
Right.
there's going to be from this decree to rebuild the temple to the coming of Jesus. Okay? Now one thing you need to know, and Jews would have known this, is there's this thing called a prophetic year. Okay? In Judaism, where they would use the lunar calendar, they would simplify their years to be 360 days because you can divide it.
Yep.
Okay? So, that many years, prophetic years, times 360 days is how much?
More math than I can do.
173,880. No, I'm not that smart.
You must have one of those really long buses.
So that's that's how many days Daniel 9 is saying should occur between the decree to rebuild the temple till Jesus comes. Okay? What else do we need to know to make this equation?
Prophecy.
Maybe when does this clock start? right?
Yes.
When did this decree go out? Does anyone know?
It's at the start of Nehemiah.
Numbers chapter 2, or sorry, Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah 2. So who was Nehemiah?
It's the guy that built the second temple.
The guy who was ordered to go rebuild Jerusalem and the temple, right? And build the wall after the exile. So Nehemiah 2 says, in the month of Nisan, the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. So I want to look up really quick, when did Artaxerxes reign?
Uh, 465 to 424.
Okay.
Artaxerxes the first.
So Artaxerxes reigned from 460. He started reigning in 465 BC,
Yeah.
right? So the 20th year of his reign would be
45.
4 the 20th year hasn't completed yet, right? So 444 technically. So 444 BC is when this decree goes out, right? Clock starts 444 BC. The month of Nisan, you can calculate the exact day, actually, and we're not going to go into that math because to take the Gregorian calendar and match it up with the Jewish calendar is really tough to do. But this is basically March 4th. March 4th, 444 BC, is when, it says in Nehemiah 2 verse 7, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, this is Nehemiah talking, let letters be given me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah, and for me to rebuild the gates and the wall and the city. And the king granted me what I asked for. Okay, so Nehemiah gets this official decree to rebuild the temple on March 4th, 444 BC. Okay? Now what day did the triumphal entry happen?
March 29.
Yeah, March 29th.
30.
March 29th, 33 AD. So the question is, how many days are in between those two periods, right?
Somebody has to
411.
How do we figure that out? Why don't we go, how many
It's 25
how many
days.
years are there between 444 BC and 33 AD?
77.
So you got minus 444,
Oh, it does all the math.
you got 0, right? And then you've got 33. So
477.
477, but you also subtract 1 because there's no year 0. It would go from 1 BC to 1 AD. Okay? So the real number is not 477, but
476.
476. Okay? So there's 476 years. How many days is that?
Times 360.
Times 360. Well, we're talking about real years now, not prophetic years.
365.
365. Now, what's interesting is there actually isn't 365 days in a year. How many days are there in a year?
365 days and a quarter.
364
In a quarter? Someone look up exactly how many days.
0.125.
Ethan's got it. Just ask AI.
He didn't give a really long conversation.
One calendar leap year has 366 days. It occurs every 4 years.
365.25.
Oh, 3.26. 365.26 days.
Yep, well, that's what we wanna know how many days are in.
Someone just look up in Google, how many days are there in a year?
You can just ask them.
That's what I got. I looked at it.
Some decimal.
I think it's like a quarter.
You just said
Like
that,
2.5.
right? Said point
This
0.25.
says on average the length of a year is approximately 365.2425.
Okay.
If you want to get really
Sure,
specific.
let's get real specific. 2425 you said?
Yeah.
Okay. What's that?
Gracious.
Someone calculate that.
Okay, so do that.
467 times 365.265.
Literally just, what's on it?
It's gonna be this 173.
Dang, that's pretty close.
Someone write it out.
173,855.43.
173,
855.43.
55.43.
You're missing your 25 days.
Except, this would calculate us to March 4th, 33 AD, right? To get from March 4th to 29
It's 25 days.
plus 25 days equals,
173.
boom, 173, 8,
I can't believe God thought to calculate leap years.
88.43.
What a small field, God.
So,
Yeah, seriously.
they match up.
We calculated the time of day.
WG code.
It's about noon.
I'm surprised your brain was working, Colin.
Again,
Right?
disclaimer, I don't know if that's supposed to be that accurate. I don't know if that's the exact day. But definitely down to the year. I mean, you could argue, leap years, should you add that fraction in there? Was that the actual day that the decree went out? Or was it, the next year after? But the point is, they knew. And there were people that, there were Jews that dedicated their lives to this, to figure this out, right? They knew when the Christ was supposed to come, right? Maybe not down to the day, but down to the time. The wise men knew, right? They were able to figure it out and follow the star. And you also have, Ethan mentioned the Bar Kokhba revolt after Christ, right? Where the Jews were like, based off our math, Messiah should have come by now. Let's, Bar Kokhba, you're a warrior. Let's put you're the Messiah now. And they kind of made him the Messiah, and they got absolutely slaughtered.
This was last Sunday's message.
Oh, did Sam talk about it?
Yeah, we were in Luke 17.
Cool. So anyways, that's the math. Don't know how accurate it is, so take that with a grain of salt, but it is pretty cool that it works out. Okay? Alright, Palm Sunday, when Jesus enters in from Bethany, riding in on a donkey, on a colt. Now, that map that you guys have there on page 171, I would edit to that a little bit. So see how that yellow arrow shows Christ kind of coming down from Bethany and entering at the top of the temple? I would actually put him entering from the bottom, which is called the dung gate. Okay? So you have Jerusalem. It's kind of shaped like this at the time of Christ, right? City of David, Temple Mount, and then this is kind of where everyone else lived. Okay? The dung gate was down here. This is the bottom of the city of David, right? Pool of Siloam was down there. And this would slope downwards, and so you had the whole marketplace, and then the temple steps, and then up into the temple. The whole marketplace was along this kind of aqueduct river along here. This is where the man born blind would have come down, washed, and then back up, right? And this was kind of the sewage system of Jerusalem. This is why this was called the dung gate, is because you basically throw your trash or whatever into the river and it would just carry it out towards the Dead Sea. Okay? Gehenna was in this valley here, the valley of Hinnom. Does anyone know what Gehenna is or means?
Wasn't that the garbage
Yeah,
pit where they burned all the garbage?
garbage pit. And so usually when you hear Jesus referring to hell in the Gospels, he said the literal translation is Gehenna. And he used this as a literal metaphor of what hell would be like, where the worm never loses its appetite, the fire never ceases, because it was an endlessly burning garbage dump in Jerusalem. So you had both of those right beside the dung gate, which was right here. And I think it's a lot more appropriate for Jesus, humble, not the way they would expect, riding on a colt to enter into Jerusalem through the dung gate, instead of the sheep's gate right here, which is what you guys have on that diagram there. Okay. Other reasons for that, it says, as we'll read, that he entered into Jerusalem before he entered the temple. This would have taken him right into the temple. It says that he sees the city as he's entering it, and he looks at the whole city. It also takes him all day to get into the temple, because at the end of this day, he's going to get into the temple, he's going to look around, but it's going to be too late in the day for him to do anything, and so he's going to turn around and go back to Bethany. So this triumphal entry, this procession that Jesus does, takes all day on this Sunday. Okay?
And isn't that how everybody would enter Jerusalem to go to the temple, because they would bathe in the pool of Siloam first and then go up? Is that how?
No, there were mikvahs to,
Everywhere?
to purify yourself, and they're still there today. There's like mikvahs on Solomon's portico here on the steps. So you didn't have to enter that way, especially because most people would live around here, right? So there was a big kind of bridge here that would take you into the temple. So there were other ways to enter the temple, but definitely from that direction, because you would have to go up these steps. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's read Matthew 21 there. So it says, "Now when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage or Bethphage, however you want to pronounce it, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, 'Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord needs them, and he will send them at once.' This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, 'Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble, mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of the beast of burden.'" So interesting, just the expectations that they would have had of the Messiah coming. But it says so clearly in Scripture how he was going to come, right? This was one of those passages that we read, I think, on the first class.
This was a colt that had never been ridden too, so.
Yeah. And so it's interesting, we always think, in the pictures it's always one donkey, right? He's riding on a donkey that's never been ridden, basically a kid donkey, I don't know.
Oh, it should be.
Some of your ranchers could tell me how to say it. But yeah, a young donkey with its mother so that it will be, it'll behave and be stable, right?
It's awesome.
Sense?
That's already made.
That's a blessed donkey.
Yeah, I mean it would be an unbroken donkey, right?
Have your board on you?
Pardon?
To have a board on you? Come on.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
a blessed donkey.
All right. Let's continue in Mark's because it gives us more detail. Let's continue in Mark 4, verse 4 there. It says, "And they went away and found a colt tied at a door outside in the street, and they untied it. And some of those standing there said to him, 'What are you doing, untying the colt?' And they told them what Jesus had said, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut from the fields. And those who went before and those who followed were shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I've never thought about it before because they already pre-cut the branches expecting him to come. Right?
Yeah. That's a really good point.
Never thought of it.
Never thought about that as well, but that would make sense, right? If they were expecting him to come.
Yeah.
They might have maybe thought he was going to be up at the Sheep's Gate, because that's where they would have expected the king to come, and they might have had to run over to the Dung Gate. But
They were going to get rid of the Romans. Well, no, happy.
and again, I don't know because it doesn't say which gate he comes through, but I suspect it was the Dung Gate. Okay. Luke's account, same thing, right? Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. I think it's really significant, too, that Luke has this. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. This fulfills prophecy from Jesus from a couple months ago, right? Does anyone remember Luke 13? What did Jesus say?
This prophecy won't be fulfilled until that day when they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Yeah, well, he says, in Luke 13:35, behold, your house is forsaken, speaking about Israel, and I tell you, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, right? That was when he was in Perea, and truly he hasn't come into Jerusalem since then, right? He came close to Jerusalem to heal Lazarus, but the next time that Jerusalem saw him is right now. Okay? Now, there's a passage missing in your guys' booklets here, so maybe you can write down in your booklet right after this account in verse 38, kind of in between those two blocks of text that you have for Luke. John 12, verse 12 to 19 should be in there.
John 12.
John 12, verses 12 to 19. Okay? And I'll read it for you guys. It's just John's account of the triumphal entry, but he adds a detail there that's significant. It says, the next day, the large crowd that had come to the feast heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. How did they hear?
Because all the pilgrims went up.
All the pilgrims. Yeah. So they had heard. They knew that he was going to come, right? So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, right? So Peggy, that's exactly what you just said, right?
Yeah.
They heard he was coming, so they preemptively cut down these branches to go and meet him because they knew he was coming. They knew exactly when he would come because he wasn't going to come during the Sabbath, so they knew he'd come Sunday morning. They said, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. And Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, quote from Zechariah. It says, his disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written about him and had been done to him. So we see that a lot through the Gospels, right? Or they remember these things afterwards. And it says, the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to bear witness. See that? The reason why the crowd went to meet him was that they heard he had done this sign. So you see that connection there? The reason the triumphal entry happened was because of the last miracle that Jesus had just did. And it was the people who had seen Lazarus raised that went back to Jerusalem and bore witness about what had happened and stirred the pot so that everyone was excited to see Jesus come this Sunday. And then it says, so the Pharisees said to one another, you see that you are gaining nothing? Look, the world has gone after him. Okay? So you see all those connections there that we've been talking about with Jesus stirring the pot, kind of all coming together here. Okay? And then it says there in Luke, someone want to read that? That section in Luke there?
Can you read it? We on 1939, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. He answered, I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that will make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation.
Yeah, so that's exactly what you were saying, Peggy, right?
You know,
This day.
I have a thought because I have messianic friends, but at one time they were just talking about this. My God knows everything from the beginning to the end. He knows what happened. But if they knew what he was the Messiah, then his millennium kingdom could have started then, right?
Yeah, well, I think that was offered at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
John paved the way. Jesus said, repent, for the kingdom is at hand. But I think by now, and I think based off what we just read in Luke 13, he said, your house is forsaken. Like,
Right.
Time's up. You've rejected me. He started teaching his disciples he was going to die because he knows that they have rejected
He
him.
knows the future, but
Yeah.
I think they were just rolling around that if they didn't reject him, then his kingdom could have started then.
Yeah.
But he knows what's
Yeah.
going to happen.
And that's what he's saying here, right?
Yeah.
Had you known this day, right? The things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes.
Mhm.
I think it's interesting. I think Jesus is directly referring to Daniel 9 here. If you had known this day that was prophesied about in Daniel 9, you could have had peace. But because you didn't, the rest of Daniel 9 prophecy is going to come to pass,
Right.
which we didn't read, but it says this. This is right after the Daniel 9 prophecy that we just calculated. It says in verse 26, and after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. Right? Isn't that exactly what Jesus is saying here?
Mhm.
For the days will come, because you didn't know the day that Daniel 9 was talking about, the days will come upon you, and your enemies will set up a barricade around you, and surround you, and hem you in on every side, and tear you down, and leave not one stone upon another, which is exactly what the Romans did in 70 AD
And it's
to the
still
temple.
going on today.
Right? Yeah.
So it's kind of when their hearts became hardened, and that's when he said Jesus came.
Yeah, they rejected their king, right?
Mhm.
The parable of the nobleman that we just read, right? His citizens said, we do not want this man to be king over us.
And on top of like him referencing Daniel 9, so I saw someone point this out that even Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, back in chapter 1, when he gives his prophecy, he even alludes to this at the start of his praise. Blessed be the Lord, God of Israel, for he has visited and redeemed his people in Israel, set a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so interesting that, the different ways that Jesus came. I mean, this time, his first coming, he comes on a donkey, right? How's he going to come the next time?
White horse.
On a white horse, right? Conquering.
As a bad of war as they wanted.
Yeah. He will come like that. Just not this first time. Right? Praise the Lord that he did.
Right, exciting.
Right? Okay, so page 174. If it's okay, we'll go a little longer because we started a little bit late.
Right.
So this is the end of this Sunday. It says, "And when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred up, saying, 'Who is this?' And the crowd said, 'This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee.'" These might be people who just traveled for the Passover, who hadn't heard about him, right? Then it says, "And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying out in the temple, 'Hosanna to the Son of David,' they were indignant. They said to him, 'Do you hear what these are saying?' And Jesus said to them, 'Yes, have you never read, out of the mouth of infants and nursing babies, you have prepared praise.'" Now this section here, I would put on Monday, this next day, because Mark gives us a very clear, this is Matthew going like, after this happened, but Mark gives us a really clear kind of anchor point where we can have better timing with Mark. See what it says there in Mark? So the triumphal entry happens in Mark's account, and he enters into Jerusalem, and he goes into the temple, and when he had looked around at everything in the temple, because it was already late, he went to Bethany with the 12. Okay?
So are you
So-
saying Matthew was later?
I'm saying Matthew just has the triumphal entry happen, and then Matthew goes, and then after this, he did things in the temple.
Oh,
Whereas Mark makes it very clear, the triumphal entry happened, he goes into the temple, he looks around but doesn't do anything. He sees what's going on there, and then he goes home because it's already late. And then the next day is when things happen. Okay? Alright. So now we're on Monday, March 30th. That's today. 1,992 years ago. So I guess maybe it's fitting, we'll do Monday really quick and then we'll end there for today. So we have intercepted our reading plan.
Wait a minute, you said March 30th.
March 30th, March 30th in 33 AD,
Okay.
right?
Monday after Palm Sunday, right.
Yeah, I mean technically, we're trying to fit the Gregorian calendar into the Jewish calendar there, right? I mean Easter is on a different day every year for us, and this year, actually, the Jewish Passover is on a different, 1 week before our Christian Easter.
You gotta have Passover before Easter.
Yeah, but like the Jewish Passover is, because Passover would be our Good Friday, I guess, or Thursday.
My husband's Greek and they go by the old calendar too.
Pardon?
My husband's Greek and they go by the old calendar as Jewish.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like for this year, like the Passover's already happened for the Jews, right? Whereas for us Christians, as we celebrate Easter, that would be this coming Thursday, right? So, but we're just going to go based off the Christian calendar for the purposes of our reading plan. And so we've kind of intercepted the reading plan, if you're keeping up with the reading plan. This is what would have happened today, okay? Today, if he would have cleansed the temple almost 2,000 years ago, okay? So, it says, in the morning, so this is now Monday morning, so after he looked around the temple last night and saw everything, now this next morning, Monday morning, as he was returning to the city, he became hungry.
Last week.
And seeing a fig tree by the wayside, he went to it and found nothing on it but only leaves. And he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And the fig tree withered at once. Now this is another one of those things that people will point to and go, look, Matthew's account says it happened on Monday, but Mark's account says that, Mark's account says that it was withered and they noticed it the next day, right? There's really no issue here. Monday is when he cursed the fig tree, and then Tuesday is when the disciples noticed that the fig tree was withered and had their talk with Jesus about it. Okay?
I'm gonna go out on a limb, this is kinda crazy. My mind's wandering.
Yeah?
Now the fig tree does not represent Israel when it blooms, but now it's cursed. Is it like cursed again until it becomes a nation?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about what the fig tree represents. I think you're
Yeah.
bang on, right? So, with that train of thought, so let's read Mark's account and start to ask this question, why is this story even here? If you really think about it, it seems kind of like an odd story, right? We just talked about how Jesus healed this guy, Simon the leper. Why isn't that story in the Gospels? John, at the end of his Gospel, says, you know, if all the stories of Jesus had been written, right, all the books could not have contained it.
No.
So of all the miracles Jesus did, why is this in here? It kind of seems strange. Like,
Precision.
why is he just like hangry and he's just mad at this fig tree, you know, like for not providing him lunch? Like, why is this put in here, right? So let's read Mark's account because there's a little more detail so we can try to figure out why this is here. So on the following day, on Monday, when they came from Bethany, Jesus was hungry, and seeing in the distance, that's an important adjective or qualifier to add, in the distance, a fig tree was in leaf. And Jesus went to see if he could find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And the disciples heard it. So, yeah, the question is, why is this here?
It's gotta be something
What is going
different.
on? Yeah, I think so. Now, people during Jesus' time would have been very familiar with figs. Figs were very, very popular. In fact, figs were, a representation of Israel in the Promised Land, right? The very first description of Israel, before they ever even go there, in Deuteronomy 8, verse 8, says it's a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates. This is like one of the very first descriptions of Israel. Numbers 13, 23, when the spies, they're about to come into the land and the spies go out and then they come back with the report, they come back with figs, right? Here's a representation of the land. Look, here we have pomegranates and figs, right? This was supposed to be, what was the point of Israel as it related to the other nations?
It's supposed to be the light to Gentile nation.
Yeah. Remember we talked about how it was strategically located where it was, right? So that passerbys would have to go through Israel.
But this is kind of exciting now that you're reading this, because when they went there, that was already a promised land. It was already what it should have been. But then it got cursed. And then it has to come again later.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, that was the point. Is it was supposed to be a blessing and a light to the other nations, right? Deuteronomy 4, verse 6 says, "Keep them and do them, the commandments, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of all the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes and commandments, will say, 'Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him?'" And so fig trees in Israel were a representation of the nourishment that Israel was supposed to provide, specifically Jerusalem and the temple, right? This was supposed to be, pastors would go through Israel and they would just be able to eat figs off of the
And that's
tree,
what Eve
right?
had, the fig tree. I'm just
Yeah.
joking, but.
Yeah, well, it was just a sign of nourishment from the Lord, right? You go to Israel and it's just so nourishing, right? That's what, the nourishment and the bountifulness, I guess, of Israel was represented by even their fig trees, where poor people could come, passerbys could come, and just eat the fruit of the land, right? All a representation of the temple and spiritual nourishment that it was supposed to provide. Now, it's interesting there that it says it was not the season for figs.
I know.
So why was this fig tree to blame?
I know, right?
Isn't that weird?
It is good.
Because it was in leaf.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's something that, is anyone here a fig tree farmer?
No.
So we don't understand this, but they would have understood this.
Right.
Okay, so here's how this works. The time for figs in Israel during the first harvest was June to July. What time of year is this?
March.
Yeah, March, yeah, around March. So it's early, right? It's not the time for figs.
No.
But the way that fig trees worked, and everyone in the land would have known this, is that the figs come before the leaves.
Oh.
So, if you saw a fig tree that had leaves on it, which you can see from far away, you definitely know that that tree, among all the other trees, is going to have figs. So Jesus sees this fig tree from a distance, and he sees the leaves, and this tree is basically with its leaves going, I definitely have figs because I have leaves. And Jesus walks all the way up to it, trying to get nourishment from it, and he finds nothing but leaves. So this tree boasted that it had nourishment from all the leaves, but it had nothing.
It's kind
Right?
of services, right?
Kind of like what was going on in the temple,
Yeah.
right? And isn't that interesting that the temple cleansing happens right after this,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what Mark is doing here, and what the gospel writers are doing here is, and what Jesus is doing here, is he's using this fig tree as an analogy of what's going on in Israel at this time, right? You've got all the flashy leaves, you boast of being the people of God, you've got the temple, you've got the gold, you've got all these things, you've got your robes, you're doing all the things, but you have zero nourishment for the people, which is supposed to be your purpose, right? And so, then he walks into, as soon as he does this, he walks into the temple, and he cleanses the temple.
It's exciting.
It says, and they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them, saying to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? See that? It was supposed to be nourishment for all the nations. And what had it become? Nothing but leaves. But you have made it a den of robbers. And the chief priests and the scribes heard it, and they were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. Isn't that incredible? Do we see that today?
We absolutely do.
This is why when Jesus says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, to his disciples who would start the church, I think we see so much of that in Christianity, Bible-based, Jesus-based religions that we see today, right? We've got all these flashy things. We've got churches filled with gold. We've got all these rituals, but it's nothing but leaves. There's no nourishment there. There's no spirit there. Right?
Like the beautiful cathedrals of like the Catholic Church. Now it's gorgeous, but what substance is there?
Yeah.
Well, the temples, it's crazy. When we walked through it, I never seen nothing like that. How much money they must have put into that.
Yeah. It's not about the Lord. It's about making money. It's about distraction. There's no nourishment. Isn't that exactly what Jesus rebuked the Pharisees of? I was in a church a couple days ago, and there were candles that you could light for, I don't know the reason, but probably some super significant reason. If you light this candle, then this will happen. But you're only allowed to light the candle if you put a $3 it said $3 offering to light one of these candles. Right?
Yeah.
Den of robbers.
Well, my Messianic friends, when they wanted to go to the synagogue for, their holidays, you had to pay money before you could go there. So they just do it in their home.
Yeah. Yeah, when Jesus said, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, right? And what does leaven do? It kind of infects the whole bread, right? I think that's what we see a lot today. In Christianity and many religions that are Jesus related. Right?
What surprised me when I came to St. George is, the Mormons, if you don't pay your dues, you're not allowed to go to the weddings that's in the temples.
Yeah,
Well,
you
that's
don't,
wrong. I
if
mean,
you- Yeah, you have to be a member of good standing,
You have to
so
be
if you're
good
not
standing.
paying your tithing,
you can't go to the
then
temple.
you can't get a temple recommend, which
Yeah.
means you can't go in the temple.
That-
You can
that's
get your
just-
blessings and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's lots of specific examples. How could we relate this, not to the point of full rebuke, but how could we maybe relate this to us and the parable of the 10 minas at the beginning?
That's what I was gonna say, no fruit,
Yeah.
we're supposed to be working, we're supposed to be fruit, faith without works is dead.
Yeah, the purpose of the tree is to bear fruit, to produce, to multiply, right? And it might be a bit of a stretch because Jesus is rebuking people who are, unbelievers here. But I think there's a little bit of a lesson for us as well, right? Do we want to be people who are nothing but leaves?
We're gonna be judged for fruitless lives.
But you gotta be done in the heart,
Yeah.
because he also says, didn't I cast out this, and didn't I do this, and I do that? But he was doing it for, like, the Pharisees, so we have to have the right heart.
Yeah, I think sometimes we can, maybe walk around, speak Christianese, serve so that people notice us, right? But are we nourishing others? Is there actual legitimate fruit? Or is it just leaves to go, look at me, I claim to have fruit. But is there real fruit, right? Is there nourishment and producing for the kingdom? Okay? One last thing. We mentioned it before. Are there 2 temple cleansings?
Yes.
The
What do you think?
The what?
To what?
2 temple cleansings? Have we read about a temple cleansing before?
Yeah,
Yeah, where?
The second cleansing.
after the first miracle.
Yeah. In John, right?
Oh, I see what you're talking about,
Too.
yeah.
First thing Jesus does after the wedding in Cana is he comes down for Passover and he cleanses the temple,
Yeah.
according to John, right? And then he has his meeting with Nicodemus. Now, there's a lot of debate. Did Jesus only cleanse the temple once and the gospel writers just, one gospel writer puts it at the beginning of his ministry and another, Matthew and Mark put it at, or Luke and Mark put it at the end? What do you think about that?
No, cause then like you said, the credibility
Yeah, I think when you
is the
start
question.
doing that, it really makes you not be able to trust the gospel writers fully. If you're kind of going, okay, John, who we know wrote later, and we know through other things we've talked about, he definitely was very familiar with the other gospel writers, and he was an eyewitness himself. For him to just completely disagree with the synoptics and say, actually, no, that didn't happen during Passion Week. It was actually one of the first things Jesus did. I would probably lose some trust, right? Wouldn't it be far more simple to just go, there were 2 temple cleansings, right? Jesus started his ministry off with it, and then 3 years later, I guess they were back to doing the same thing. It hadn't worked, and so he comes back and cleanses the temple again, right? Anyways, that's the position I hold when it comes to the temple cleansings, but it's debated.
Well, it makes sense because like you said, they didn't learn anything, they didn't change anything, they just went back to doing things, which is just typical.
Yeah.
A lot of people do.
Absolutely. And so he comes to the temple, as Mark says, on Monday, and he looks around. And I just imagine, what he's thinking. He's looking around, he's just like, he had just wept over Jerusalem. From afar, as he enters Jerusalem, he's weeping over it. Even though they're praising him, right? Look at all these leaves. We're calling you, Hosanna. We're calling you king. And Jesus is like, it's nothing but leaves though. Look, I come into the temple, I look around, what do I see? No fruit.
It was interesting about the leaves. Sam had said something in the sermon, that was actually like a rebel flag. When they
Oh,
waved
yes,
the
yes.
palm branches, like during the time of the Maccabees,
Hmm.
that they had done that, and they waved the palm branches, and so like as a
Like
king,
worship.
like
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
more like
Right.
overthrow.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was literally nothing but leaves, as they were waving actual leaves. Sure, you're calling me king today. What are you going to do to me in a week? Yeah. Okay, let's end it there. Dylan, you want to pray to close?
Yeah, that'd be good. Lord, thank you for everyone who was able to make it tonight, Lord, and Lord, just as we open up your word, we just pray, Lord, that this will lead to our hearts being changed and us being more conformed into your image. I just thank you for James and the hospitality of Desert Ridge to host us here, Lord. Lord, we ask that many more years to come that this will be able to be ongoing, and so that others may learn and that we may see others come to know you. Lord, it is by your grace that each and every one of us have been able to be here and be able to learn your words, Lord. Let us not take it for granted. Just help us to act by your Spirit and continue to be obedient to you. We just pray all these things in your name. Amen.
Thanks, Dylan.
Do you have another one of these?
I don't have a physical copy, but they're on our website.
Oh, yeah. Costco has good stuff.
Are you going downstairs again?
Lori, here, take
Nope.
this
Like
one.
that.
I got one.
done?
Me and Tom
Yeah, I'm
have
done with the legs, yeah.
one.
That's cool.
But you've done
Wait,
everything back to
like
the.